Today we're gonna make apple butter. There's actually no butter in it at all, but it has that smooth, silky texture of butter, but it's really just made of apples, apple cider, some spices, and sugar. So this is not the easiest apple butter you could possibly make, but it is the best, so I think it's worth it. The first step is you're gonna take all of your apples and we're gonna peel and core them. So just, start peeling. I like to peel on parchment, and that way you don't have to clean it up. It's just really easy. These apples are a variety, so I want you to choose at least 5 different types of apples. So this is about, I want to say it's about like 4.5 pounds of unpeeled apples. If you had a peeler core machine situation, that would be great here. Next, we're just going to chop them all in half. Another great thing about apple butter is that not only do your apples not have to be the most beautiful in the bunch, but they also don't really have to be, it doesn't really matter what shape they are or how you cut them, or they don't have to be uniform. So we're going to really just kind of get out the core and then cut some of the bigger ones down to the size of its friends because everybody else is kind of tiny. Now we've got all of our apples in halves, and we're just going to go through and we're going to cut out the core. Now this is a perfectly acceptable size for our apple butter. If you have an apple core, you can totally use that. Perfectly acceptable. Alright, so now we've got all of our apples are kind of cut into like this size. If you had big apples, you should definitely cut those little quarters into half. And then I'm just going to take and I'm going to put them all in my bowl. In we go. And we're ready to start cooking. So we are going to caramelize our sugar in a pot. I like to choose one with a nice high sides and a thick bottom. Dutch ovens also work great here. We're going to make a dry caramel, which just means that we aren't going to add any sort of water or corn syrup or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on fairly high. So the thing with dry caramel is that you can stir a dry caramel. In fact, you probably want to, especially in this application, because it's going to start caramelizing unevenly, and you want an even caramel. So we're just going to let it heat up for a minute until I start to see the sugar melting around the sides or any sort of dark color kind of popping through. I'm just going to stir it a little bit, make sure that nothing is getting too dark too fast. And so as more of my sugar starts to melt, it's obviously getting hotter, and I'm going to start to kind of like hit those sugar clusters just to kind of encourage them to break up. And obviously you have to remember that the more caramel you have in your pot, the darker it's going to look earlier, right? So you're looking through lots of layers of caramel. And at this point, when you see no more crystals or anything like that, you don't have to continue to stir. And so we are getting closer. Do you see how it's getting a little darker? That's lovely. Yeah, so my pot has decided to cook unevenly, and you can see that it's actually turned a very dark shade, and that's where we're going to pour in our apple cider. So be very careful. It's going to bubble. Be very, very careful. Be careful of the steam. This is hot. So, as I said, it's hot. Put that in there, and then we're going to add our apples. Carefully, you don't want to splash the caramel on you. And then we're going to add our spices. So I've got a cinnamon stick, I have ground cloves, ground cinnamon, and ginger. Boop, boop. And we are going to stir that up. Carefully remember that the caramel is still really hot, even though you just deglazed it with all of that apple cider that was cold. You just want to make sure that you don't splash anything on you. But you see how it's a nice dark color? That is lovely. We're going to turn this back on, kind of on medium, and then we're going to cook this for about an hour. We're going to let the apples kind of break down and cook and soften, and then we are going to go to the next step. You can see that my apple butter is nice and thick, and the apples are broken down, and the ones that you can still see are actually super tender. So I'm just going to fish out there she is. I'm going to fish out my cinnamon stick, And then I'm going to immersion blend my apple butter. Now this is what's going to take this apple butter to the next level. You can put this in a blender. If you do that, then just be aware that it is very hot and you want to be very careful. And then I'm just going to kind of start to immersion blend. This is not going to get it perfectly smooth. You just want to kind of break down as much as you can. Okay, so it is now super silky smooth. In order to make it kind of that texture of butter, I like to pass it through what's called a chinois, or like a very, very fine sieve. So I'm just going to pour that into my sieve, and I am going to scrape out everything. The best way to get things through a chinois or a very fine sieve like this is to use a ladle. And you see how fast that actually moves it through the bottom as opposed to trying to sit there and like tap it or like smash it through with a spatula. No, not in my kitchen. Okay, so I'm just left with just a teeny bit in the bottom of my chinois. So do you see the consistency? It kind of like runs off my spatula. It's very thick, or excuse me, it's very thin. And I really want a nice thick spread. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna keep cooking this and reducing it down until it's like super duper thick. It's gonna take a lot longer than you think, so probably maybe an hour at least. So just kind of let it simmer, stir it every now and again, make sure it's not sticking or burning to the bottom of the pan. It will appear as if it's sticking, but it is just, you know, that is part of the process. So we're just gonna turn this back on low, and it's gonna start to bubble and kind of spit everywhere, and I'm just gonna let it do its thing. Okay, so you can see that our apple butter has not only spread everywhere into my kitchen, but it is also, it's very, very thick. You can, you know, hear the bubbles. You don't want it to run in any sort of way. It's kind of globbing off, I'm shaking it off, and that is perfect. So all we're gonna do at this point is we're gonna transfer it to a bowl, and we're gonna cool it down. Just be very careful. She's hot and violent. Pour it in there. Oh my goodness, do you see how divine this is? So if you're impatient, you can cool this down in an ice bath, so a bit of ice in a bigger bowl and some water, and then you just go ahead and like pop it in the fridge, or you can kind of let it gradually cool down. But this is gonna be delicious. Our apple butter is cool. It is the moment we've all been waiting for. It is beautiful and thick. Like, look how luscious this is. Oh my goodness. It's this like deep caramel color from the apples and the caramel and the spices. Oh yes. This would be amazing on toast, with some butter, on some banana bread, pumpkin bread. Blow your mind. Also fabulous. You can put it in whipped cream. You can put it on a sauce, like as a sauce for pies, or I mean, the world is your oyster. This is phenomenal. I think we're ready to try it. So, just gonna get in there. The texture is so smooth and creamy, and the flavor is like a deep, rich caramel with like hints of spices and lots of apple notes, and it's just, well, it's just heaven, for sure. Oh yeah, luscious.